What harsh truths do you prefer to ignore? Well, whether I can regard this as a truth is a very contentious matter, and can also be attributed to my spiritual persuasion, although it's going to be different for everyone. So, that truth is the futility, I believe, of existence. The fact that we only have one life on this planet to live out. The fact that there is nothing more after this. It just instills within me that sense of futility. Although, what I will say is that we certainly can enjoy ourselves while we're here. We can enjoy the experiences that we have, the relationships that we form. So, in a way, there certainly is a certain beauty behind life. Although, the fact that this will inevitably come to an end, and then, presumably after that, there'll just simply be nothing, aside from a perpetual void that when we cease to exist. Which, in a way, it certainly is a depressing thought, but what can you do, really? That's how I believe things are going to pan out. You could perhaps argue a spiritual argument, say, reincarnation could be feasible. An individual could go to heaven or hell as a result of the morally relevant decisions they've made throughout their lifetime. Although, as I've said, my spiritual stance doesn't permit this to be the case. I'm just simply not convinced of the arguments in support of these assertions. And so, the harsh truth that I'd prefer to ignore would be the futility of existence. Is free will real, or just an illusion? Well, personally, I believe free will is an illusion. Because what we can say, essentially, is that if a person were to have free will, then they would have had the ability to have acted differently in a particular scenario, given the same set of circumstances, the exact conditions within the brain, which it just seems infeasible to me. Because what this would essentially mean is that we had needed to have had an event occur without a prior cause. We would have needed to have introduced an element of randomness, true randomness, into the biological mind, which, from my point of view, this just seems wholly infeasible. And even if this element of randomness were to be present within the biological mind, we'd then still need to consider the fact that, well, the human being in question would have not been able to actually control these processes. They are essentially completely out of an individual's control, and they dictate their action. And so it just seems to me that we cannot reconcile this with free will. I mean, many people like to throw the concept of free will around and say, we're free because we can act in a way that befits us. We can do whatever we want. But they seem to simultaneously disregard, well, the fact that it appears as though we are truly not able even to decide what it is we want, because these wants can essentially at least the vast majority of the time, be chalked up to predispositions of which we have no control. So it just seems as though the whole concept of free will is completely infeasible to me. Is there a meaning to life? If so, what is it? Well, this has been a heavily debated question in philosophy, and many people do advocate for an objective meaning to life, in the sense that they believe in a deity, a supernatural entity that prescribes them moral obligations, moral duties, I suppose, and they live for this entity. So religion, essentially, they follow a range of rules that have been prescribed to them in order to gain entry into heaven, and then this is their reason for being. So many regard that as being an objective meaning that can be ascribed to their lives, although whether this is truly objective is up for debate. I'd say personally this is not an objective meaning, because as of yet we've yet to receive any irrefutable objective evidence for the existence of any of these supernatural entities, any of these deities, so really I wouldn't personally regard it as being objective. Now, an objective meaning to a human's life, or indeed any being residing on this planet, biologically, would be procreation. We look in nature, the ultimate goal of any animal is to procreate, to propagate their species, to spread their genes. So that is about as close as I'd personally say we'd get to an objective meaning within life. But what I most like to consider in a question such as this is the notion of a subjective meaning. Now, many people do not believe in an objective meaning to life. I'd say myself included, aside from perhaps the biological incentive to reproduce. So in that sense, I find it quite beautiful, honestly. I suppose that would be one way to describe it. Beautiful. That we can draw our own conclusions, that we can have our own life goals, our own ambitions. We can truly derive our own meaning from our lives. We don't need to have it prescribed or premeditated by any higher entity. We can just say, oh, this is what we want to achieve with our lives, this is what we want to do. We can just set out to achieve it. We can define our own meaning. And I feel as though that's quite liberating, honestly. I feel as though that's the way it truly should be for us. So, personally, I'd say we can define our meaning. We can define our meaning. We can choose what we want to live for. And for me personally, I'd say, well, I want to live for the pursuit of knowledge. I want to feel as though I can scrutinize everything. I can draw my own conclusions, and the beliefs I hold, or the stances I'm convinced of, I want to be sure they're sound. And by extension, I also want to form fruitful connections. I want to feel respected. I want to feel as though I can contribute to my society, at least to some extent. I want to support other people, to ensure that they can reach their full potential, that they are living good lives, whatever we can define a good life as being. That's a whole different question in and of itself. But ultimately, it's different for every person. It's different for every person. I perhaps also should add that my meaning to life also should encompass a moral framework that I feel as though allows me to exist within my society, to treat others with the dignity and respect that they deserve. And so that's my personal answer to the question, although everyone's is going to differ. I don't have my ultimate goal that I strive towards. I just seek to really remain consistent in what I'm currently doing, and that's fine, I'd say, because really I don't feel as though there's anything for me to ultimately strive for. I don't really desire any material possessions in a sense, at least not to the extent that many others do, to define it as their life goal. I don't believe in real fulfillment or of becoming rich, of becoming famous, of being ambitious. It's really it just seems in a sense very superficial to me. Where is the line between art and not art? This is a very fascinating question, but I'm not entirely sure whether I'll have a great deal to say about it, in all honesty. Although, I suppose we should first consider what we define to be art. So, usually when we define art, we see a piece of art as being a form, a depiction of something, an event, a scenario, a person perhaps, that holds meaning for other people and holds meaning for the world at large. Perhaps it depicts a moment since lost to time. I suppose that would be one way to look at it. We could also define art as being beautiful in a sense, although this wouldn't always be the case. We certainly do have grim, macabre art that many would not perceive to be beautiful. So really, that's not always going to be applicable to a piece of art, but broadly speaking, I'd say this line perhaps isn't really definable, because what we perceive to be art, what a human being perceives to be art, may not be the case for another human being. Perhaps it's not truly possible to say that an objective measurement exists for what we can classify as art versus what we cannot. Perhaps it truly just comes down to the interpretation of the individual concerned, of what they personally perceive to be art, whether they personally derive meaning from this, the event or that's been depicted within the art, or the image, I suppose. What should be the goal of humanity? Now, I personally believe the goal for humanity should be the attainment of as much knowledge as possible. I suppose the discernment of truth. Now, the reason why I believe this is because we have brains. We are able to perceive the world around us. We are able to draw profound conclusions. We're able to scrutinize what we believe. We're able to investigate various different areas of existence, and by extension scientific inquiry. So really, we are provided with that medium with which to actually scrutinize everything. We can look inwards, we can take a look at our own beliefs to see whether they ultimately are sound. And then we can also look at the world around us. I mean, how much has scientific inquiry done for us? We now know that atoms exist. I mean, just to take a fairly generic, stereotypical example. So really, it's done a hell of a lot for us. And with this scientific inquiry, we've developed ourselves. We've progressed. We now have antibiotics that have greatly enhanced the lifespan of humans. For example, we now have technology that allows us to communicate with each other from across the world. I mean, even in this video right here, the only reason you're able to hear this is because the internet exists, because we have actually made those technological advancements, because we have made scientific discoveries that have permitted us to develop such technology. So really, I mean, it certainly is getting us places, but we could also argue that it's not in our best interest to continue down this route, given the adverse effects it's had on the environment, on other people. So really, that's just a matter of personal preference, I suppose. So, although when it comes to the universe at large and other profound questions that we've posed, I mean, what is the meaning of life? What was there before the universe? Has the universe always existed? We're still no closer to determining the answers to these questions. And so, really, I feel as though our goal should be to use our brains, our potential, to discover all that we possibly can, to truly pursue the knowledge that is out there waiting for us to accrue, I suppose. Although, really, this is just my subjective take. This question, there are so many different interpretations to be made. So really, perhaps you have a different take on this. I mean, everyone's going to be thinking differently about the ultimate goal of humanity. I mean, some people perhaps would say, oh, the domination of space. Perhaps we should be occupying multiple solar systems. We should become a space-traversing species. I mean, valid, I suppose. We do have the brain that we have could also permit us to do that. But really, I mean, it's an open-ended question. We could go any route, but there's no definitive answer to it. No ultimate goal to humanity, because as I mentioned earlier, I advocate for subjective meaning, and so really, this is how we should view it. We should say, oh, perhaps every person should be able to determine what the ultimate goal of humanity is, and then on the basis of this, we can determine, oh, how many people have this in common? How many people believe that we should strive for this particular end? And then we can coordinate this as a society, or we can perhaps look at different groups of people who are coming together to realize a particular goal, to achieve a particular end. So really, it doesn't need to be an ultimate goal to humanity. It could be a goal of particular groups of people, and that's perfectly fine, I'd say. Does fate exist? If so, do we have free will? Well, I don't believe this can be answered at present, at least in a definitive sense. So, fate can be attributed, at least the generic definition of fate usually encompasses the presence of a divine entity, a deity. So, with all intents and purposes, we could say God, that premeditates all of this. So I suppose you could look at it from that perspective. Or you could also look at it from the perspective of the free will question I addressed earlier. Is free will real or just an illusion? This question, I suppose, is fairly similar. Perhaps you could even regard it as being identical in principle. So, I believe, yes, fate can exist if we're not to regard fate as being attributed to a supernatural divine entity. Because, as I mentioned earlier, events do require a prior cause. At least the scientific consensus is that events require a prior cause, and so must conform to the principle of sufficient reason, because as of right now we have not really been able to ascertain any events that have occurred without a prior cause. We could say the universe itself, although this area of research is still very much inconclusive. And so, really, what can we say? Well, I mean, I suppose we do have research in areas such as quantum mechanics, whereby movement has been noted within particles, seemingly uncaused, seemingly random. But I'd still hold that ultimately this process would be able to be determined if we had all of the variables we could possibly need to draw that conclusion. Although perhaps this wouldn't be the case. Although I still feel as though as humans we always have more to understand. There's always more we can discover as a species. And so really I'd say events that don't have a cause or appear not to have a cause is just a lack of knowledge. We just haven't discovered what the cause is yet. And I suppose I've gone off on a bit of a tangent here, so I'd like to actually return to the original question posed. So, as I did say earlier, if fate does exist, at least in the sense of determinism, which is the philosophical belief that all events are predetermined, then free will is not reconcilable with this notion at all. Because to have free will, at least by my definition, is the ability to have acted differently. And if all of your actions are predetermined, then there's no way you could have acted differently, and so really you can't advocate for free will if you also believe in determinism. And even as I mentioned earlier, if we were to introduce randomness into the equation, we were to say, oh, perhaps there are some random processes that do occur within the human brain. Well, we're still not in control of those processes, and so ultimately there still wouldn't be free will. I don't see a feasible scenario where free will could actually exist. Perhaps I'm just ill-informed, and it is fairly easy to imagine such a scenario, but I just simply cannot see it being feasible. What does it mean to live a good life? Now, a good life is wholly subjective, I'd say, because every individual is going to have a different definition, at least by and large, of what they personally believe a good life to be. And so, really, the only way to answer this question is personal reflection. What personally do you believe an individual, or indeed yourself, you should strive for during your life, and what you should achieve? And so I'll go the same route when answering this question. So personally, to live a good life, I already mentioned some of these principles earlier, but I believe I should be a respectful individual. I should be respected. I should be treating others with dignity. I should be maintaining a moral framework that allows me to exist within my society, to be an upstanding member of my society, and to also seek knowledge, to reach profound truths and conclusions, and to scrutinize everything. And so, really, that's my perspective on this particular question, although yours is likely to be far different. So, really, wholly subjective question. Why do we dream? Well, this isn't a question I'm able to answer in a biological sense, although in a philosophical sense, I believe to dream, the reason why an individual will dream is, I suppose, to either raise problem areas within their life in the sense of a nightmare, or to express desires. So frequently when we regard a dream as being good, so I suppose a dream in some cases could be defined as being the antithesis of a nightmare. And so in this sense, we could say that a dream is an experience that we enjoy, something that we perhaps strive for, whereas a nightmare is suffering. It's what we desire to avoid. Say, what do we commonly refer to as a nightmare? There's the stereotypical or generic dream of falling off the side of a building, being chased by a serial killer, inhabiting a room full of spiders. I mean, really, it does tell you a lot about who you are as a person, your fears, your desires, what you enjoy. It's sort of an introspective of your mind. You can take a look at what's going on inside there, what your inner workings are, because essentially dreams are the reflection of that. And it can be quite insightful at times. They can help you get to know yourself a little better, although they can for certain be a little, I suppose, arbitrary, the events that occur within them a little erratic. I feel as though documenting your dreams could also be a decent approach, because it can help you remember, I suppose, what you went through in your mind. Perhaps there's some deeper meaning to be discerned from these dreams upon deeper reflection, because when you're inside the dream itself, you don't really have time to reflect, or at least not in the sense that you would as an observer, as an onlooker. Where does your self-worth come from? I feel as though I derive much of my self-worth by being of good company to other people, to make them feel as though they are valued as individuals, to help them reach their full potential, to serve as an ear for them if they require that, if they desire to discuss topics that are interesting them, or perhaps they're distressed in a certain situation. So I feel as though I can really be that for another person. So it's a little bit of I suppose it would be a selfless way to derive self-worth, as ironic as that is, I suppose. And by extension, I'd also say I derive much of my self-worth from my ability to scrutinize, to reach conclusions on the basis of my own reasoning. And so, yeah, I'd say primarily this could be attributed to critical thinking skills. I really enjoy discovering what I truly believe. I don't really want to be marred by values that have been instilled within me from birth, perhaps by the society or those around me. So, yeah, I really don't advocate for indoctrination. I believe people should draw their own conclusions. They should be able to decide what they personally believe. They should be provided with both sides of the argument in regards to a variety of matters, really. They shouldn't be told what to believe. They should be able to decide what to believe. That's my stance personally. And I suppose as far as self-worth goes, yes, it would be my introspection and my ability to really empathize with others and to feel as though I'm a valuable asset to others and my community at large. How will humans as a species go extinct? Now, I don't have precognition skills in regards to this matter, although I can, I suppose, make inferences on the basis of how we as a species have conducted ourselves throughout the millennia that we have existed, at least in our advanced civilizations. And so what I'd say would be the most probable way humans as a species will go extinct would be, ironically, self-sabotage. We will bring about our own extinction due to our myopic tendencies, or I suppose just an inaction on important matters. I mean, we can even see it nowadays. We can see inaction on climate change. We can see inaction in regards to our deriving sustainable energy, developing green alternatives. I mean, really, it's just it seems as though we've just become complacent with how much we've developed as a society, and we're failing to address all of these issues that have cropped up as a result of our development. Because if we were to remain a simplistic society, before we would have developed all of these hyper advanced technologies, before we would have made strides to develop all of these computer systems that allow us to interact with each other, develop the internet. So prior to this technological revolution, I suppose we wouldn't have had any of these problems. We wouldn't have needed to worry about climate change, because we wouldn't have been burning fossil fuels en masse, much to our own detriment. And so really it feels as though we will go extinct because we are neglecting problems that have been built up over time and have made themselves apparent to us, and we have just chosen not to act on them. and so ultimately that will lead to our downfall, which is it's a little depressing, honestly, because when you look at a problem and you're able to ascertain that it was avoidable, easily avoidable in fact, with a bit of forethought, then really, I mean, that's just disappointing. And I do believe this is the route we will go. I suppose there could be some random event that occurs. I mean, a meteorite could hit our planet and take us all out in that instance. I suppose our behaviour would have no real bearing on whether that does happen, unless perhaps we were to somehow be able to intercept the meteorite. But then again, I mean, perhaps you've watched the movie Don't Look Up, and when the meteorite, spoiler alert by the way, when the meteorite does actually come into near contact with the Earth, everyone, well I suppose the billionaires at least, the corporate suits, they advocate to send drones up there to harvest the materials from the meteorite instead of destroying it. And so really perhaps we're always doomed to self-sabotage. I mean, perhaps that's what we are as a species. Our greed is always going to outweigh our desire to sustain ourselves and to retain a society, a civilization, I suppose, that is sustainable.